Okay, hey everybody, are we live now? My name is Laura Still, and I'm just going to see if I can confirm that everybody's hearing me here. Let me see if I can get the chat line up here. Okay, well, not really seeing much there, so we'll just put it down. I hope Emily is supposed to be watching with me in the Airwood, so I hope if anybody has a question, do go ahead and use the chat, and don't hesitate to ask questions, especially at the end. We're probably going to have a few minutes to do that. My name is Laura Still, and I am the storyteller, tour guide, and creator of Knoxville Walking Tours, and we do 13 different walking tours in Knoxville, mostly downtown. Our website is knoxvillewalkingtours.com, and we also have a Facebook page with the same name, Knoxville Walking Tours, if you want to check us out later. I basically do all the tours myself. I wrote and researched them all, and I do all the actual walking tours. We're still doing private tours right now because of the COVID pandemic. We just do small groups from usually only one or two households, but we'll do up to 10 people at once. My business partner is the fellow who maintains our website, and Brent takes care of booking the tours and maintaining the website, getting the photographs that we need for it. And he does all the technical stuff. So he's the IT department. He does all the hard stuff, and I do all the fun stuff. So I think it's a good arrangement myself. We are also partnered with the Knoxville History Project, and the reason I'm here today is because Jack Neely referred me to the folks who maintain this site. And when we do a downtown tour, part of the ticket price goes to the History Project. So we like to support them as a nonprofit because Jack has been very generous and shared his research with me and his stories. And we do a lot of projects together now. We just finished doing a large project for the suffrage year, the suffrage centennial, and we came up with a new tour out of that information. I started a new tour called Misbehaving Women, and actually took a class from a tourism class from UT on that tour a couple weeks ago. So very happy to share that information with anybody who wants to talk about it later too. A few years ago, I wrote a book, and my ghost tour that I was doing at the time was the inspiration for this book, which is A Haunted History of Knoxville. And as a result, 3 of my tours are ghost tours, because when you write a book about the haunted history of a city, suddenly you become the go-to person for ghost stories and ghostly history for the town. And so now I get phone calls from people all the time who are looking for explanations of ghost stories that they've heard. They want me to research their house. They've had something weird happen. They want to know if there's any history to follow this up. So I answer a lot of those questions too. When I wrote my book, I had a certain criteria. I didn't put any ghosts in the book that did not have a actual historical incident that would cause a ghost to be haunting that place. And I like my ghosts to have a past. I wanted this to be a real person that has a story to tell. And when I started doing this, people would always ask me, what? I had no idea. They'd say, I have no idea that we had tours here in Knoxville. And the other thing they'd always ask is, what made you think you wanted to do this? And it's one of those strange things where I thought of the idea. I tried to get Jack to do it. He didn't have time and wanted me to. He said, it's your idea. You take care of this. You start this. And after a while, after I studied and researched and got some stories together, the stories kind of got hold of me. And that's the short answer about why I do this. It's about the stories. People, as human beings, we need stories. They help us to remember our past, to define our present, and to move toward our future. And stories connect us. They connect us with other people, other places, other time periods, and other cultures. Knoxville has so many stories, so many great stories, and I love to tell them to people, and that's why I have so many tours, and I'm sure another one will be written in the next year or so. I couldn't possibly tell all of Knoxville's stories in one tour, so I love telling them. So here I am, telling stories. And I hope to keep doing that. But right now, just like it says on our slogan on our website is, let me tell you a story. So now, let me tell you one. Because this was about UT, I wanted to do something that had to do with the campus, and they asked me to look for things, that might have to do with UT campus. When I did my book, I had heard several stories about the campus that I wasn't able to verify actual historical backgrounds for these, except for one. And this is in the section called Haunted Sites Along the Riverbank. And we'll just start, and I'll read this part of this chapter to you. Above the bend in the river, the Native Americans called Coolawasi, brewed the cliffs called Cherokee Bluff. During the Civil War years and a few decades after, they were called Longstreet's Heights, after the Confederate general who ordered cannons placed at the top during the siege of Knoxville in 1863. The Battle of Armstrong's Hill was fought near the top of these cliffs on November 25, 1863, as General Jerome Robertson's Texas Brigade and General E. McIver Law's Alabama Brigade were joined by the Virginians under Captain William Parker, and they tried unsuccessfully to dislodge Union troops from Fort Higley, taking 100 casualties in the attempt. At the foot of the cliffs are caves opening up onto the river, rumored to have been used by runaway slaves and deserting soldiers from both sides. E.M. Johnson spent enough time in one of them to carve his initials and his name in 1865, near the end of the war. Ghosts from those bloody years of violence are said to linger around the caves and the cliffs, but they aren't the only spirits at the bend of the river. Just opposite the bluff on the north bank is part of the UT Agricultural Campus, with its greenhouses and its beautiful trial gardens. In the midst of the buildings there is a small park, which consists of a few benches around a peculiar hump. It's bare, except for grass and maybe a few trees. This odd little hill is the oldest man-made creation in Knoxville, the only remnant of a people who loved and left this river valley long before the Cherokee ever arrived. The hump is a burial mound, probably one of a series constructed by the hunter-gatherer people who lived here in the late woodland period. It may contain up to 100 graves of the folk they called the Hamilton people, whose religious rites were very little known. However, it is thought that the tribes transported their dead to prescribed burial sites, sacred to the purpose, and only to be approached at certain times, when all the dead of the previous years were transported to the hallowed ground and reburied in mystical ceremonies that would assist their journey to the afterlife. It is likely that there were other mounds along the river, but they have long been eroded, plundered, or otherwise destroyed in the ages since the last of these ancients who consecrated them left the valley. There are always consequences when hallowed ground is disturbed. The spot opposite the bluff there has a history of catastrophe. Here was the former location of the Whittle sawmill, which blew up December 22, 1893, killing 4 people. One of them was the owner, J.M. Whittle, and according to one of the old newspaper accounts, his body was blown 50 feet into the air. It was recovered, more or less intact, which was better than the other folks. The other victims had to be buried with some pieces still missing. No wonder they are said to wander the riverbank, sometimes floating over the water near Third Creek, looking for unrecovered parts. A few weeks after the debris of the sawmill was cleaned up, an enterprising company built a cable car line near the site of the explosion. The steel cables stretched from the north bank of the river to the top of Cherokee Bluff, suspending a trolley car 200 feet over the river. The company assured everyone that this astonishing new technology was absolutely safe. They even put a load of sand that weighed 5 tons in the trolley car and transported it back and forth to show how strong and stable these cables were. Knoxvillians, always ready for something new, lined up for tickets to ride to the cliffs in thin air. Tragically, the success of the new attraction was brief. On an unseasonably warm day in February 1894, 8 passengers boarded the trolley car, anticipating an unrivaled view of the river and the city, and a visit to the cliff top where the city was planning to build a park. Just a pleasant adventure on a Saturday afternoon, but they got more adventure than they bargained for. As the trolley neared the destination at the cliff top, there was a loud snap, and the cable car slid backwards, shooting over the river at hideous speed. Operator applied the brakes, but it was no good. The diving trolley was only stopped when the snaking cable whipped around it and snarled up with the other cables, and it jerked the car to an abrupt halt that flung the passengers to the floor, bruised and bleeding. When they disentangled themselves, they were hanging 135 feet above the Tennessee's deep current, and no one had any idea how to get them down. Worse yet, one of the passengers didn't get up. Oliver Ledgerwood, an attorney who had brought the only female passenger as his date, lay unconscious from a head injury. The situation was unprecedented, and the passengers dangled above the river while those on the shore grappled with how to rescue them. After about 90 minutes, the rescuers managed to slide a rope down the cable into the trolley, but there was nowhere for them to land. Then a steam-powered yacht called the Vollet was able to position itself directly underneath the dangling trolley car, and the passengers fashioned a sling out of the rope and were able to lower themselves one at a time down to the deck of the boat. One of the crew, a brawny black man named Andy Harris, volunteered to ascend the rope, and he was able to safely carry the unconscious Oliver Ledgerwood down to the deck, where a doctor was waiting to treat the injured man. Sadly, Oliver never regained consciousness. He breathed his last as the Vollet approached the Knoxville City docks. The broken cable, recovered and examined, appeared to have been cut, and gossip circulated concerning various motives for such a dastardly act. Could the saboteur be a rival of Ledgerwood for the young lady's affections? Or was someone else in that cable car the target? Was it an enemy of the investors in the cable car company who wanted the venture to fail? And if so, that object was achieved because after this disaster, the company folded. The inquest that was held on the accident blamed them for not securing their equipment against sabotage. The mysterious perpetrator, however, was never found. And no one could imagine a person monstrous enough to act with such complete disregard of innocent lives. The Knoxville papers even used the word fiend, which is usually defined as a cruel or evil person or spirit. So which do you think it was? A cruel person or an evil spirit? You might ask the ghost of Oliver Ledgerwood, who has been seen fluttering in the air around the river bluffs, but he's been as silent as the day he died. Or you might spend some time on a bench near the ancient mound on the Ag campus and wonder if any of the occupants might have left the door to the afterlife open just a crack in case they needed to come back and protect their hallowed hill. So that is the end of that story, but because I was intrigued by the idea of sharing some more new ghosts, I decided to do some research on other possible haunted sites on the campus, just so those of you who are interested in that sort of thing might be able to check this out, perhaps. So, the college started on Gay Street in 1794, and they grew out of their premises there. So in 1826, they were looking to build a new building, and they bought some land outside the city on a hill that was called Barbara Hill. It was named after William Blount's daughter, so it's kind of fitting that they would decide to put the new campus there because the original college was created because William Blount, who was our territorial governor, wanted to educate his daughter Barbara. So they bought this plot of land and they began to excavate for the foundation, but they found 2 skeletons buried in the hill. And at first they thought that these were the remains of Cherokee that had been buried there. But then some of the old-timers began to remember the funeral of a certain Colonel Christian. His nickname was Colonel Christie. And he had died of a fever in 1793 and had been buried with elaborate military and Masonic rituals on top of the hill. Now, a little later, a former servant of Governor Blount, named Titus Ogden, he was known to them because he ran a general store on State Street. He died and was interred on the same spot as Colonel Christie. Their graves were marked at the time, but they were wooden crosses, and over time they deteriorated and people forgot about them. So nobody knew that they remembered that these burial plots were there until this construction crew disturbed them 30 years later. It's interesting that in 1828, when the new college building was completed, a critical reporter called it described it as melancholy and a tomb of extravagance. Kind of apt words for a place that's built on a burial plot. So if you want to wander on up there to Ayers Hall sometime, then you might be able to see some of these. Maybe Colonel Christie and Titus might wander around sometimes if they feel a little bit annoyed that their burial plots were disturbed. One other thing, and I researched, and the clue was provided to me by Jack Neely about a school that was on it was the Rose Street School, and Rose Street was where Andy Holt is today. And it was originally built as the Rose Street School in 1890, but it was renamed the Staub School later. Peter Staub was one of our mayors, so they named it after him when it was a few years after the school had been occupied. Now, in 1895, they had closed the school because they didn't have enough students for it. And briefly, though, during this period, from 1895 to 1902, it became a medical school. And I found a very interesting paragraph in the history of the Staub School at the McClung Museum. So I'm going to read that to you. Almost concurrently with the establishment of the city of West Knoxville and its schools, there had been established in the city of Knoxville a privately operated medical college known as the Tennessee Medical College. This institution had been in business at the southeast corner of Dameron Avenue and Cleveland Place for some 10 years when its building was completely destroyed by fire. Rose Avenue School being vacant at the time for want of pupils, it provided an excellent location for this medical college after its disaster, and while its new structure was being erected. Upon application to the mayor and board of aldermen, it was rented at $250 annually to the medical college. Thus, once more, Rose Avenue became an active educational institution, this time, however, as a medical college. It is recorded that it remained a medical college until 1902, and living alumni of the old school in the early years thereafter will vividly recall the weird tales of finding human skulls and bones about the premises. And how they were afraid to go up into the attic or into the empty bell tower because of the blood splotches on the stair walls. Little is known of the operations of the building during this period, as the records of the medical college are no longer available. So you have to wonder what was going on in that building when it was a medical college. Now, if you want to try to find the place now, of course, Rose Street no longer exists. There's Andy Holt Avenue instead. And the building itself was bought, where the school was bought by UT around 1957. And they first used it for a maintenance place for their maintenance staff, but it was later torn down. And the building would have been where the parking lot between the aquatic center and the tennis courts are on Andy Holt. So if you are on your way to the pool or on your way back from the pool some evening, watch out for some ghostly remnants in that area. you might meet something. Just a good place to check. Now, of course, because it's football season, I knew I needed to include a football story here. And I couldn't find out a whole lot about the early days of football. Unfortunately, back in those days, the press didn't really cover UT's games very often. The big powerhouses in this area for football was not UT, it was Sewanee College. And they got most of the press, unfortunately. But I did find out a little bit. The early games were played on a baseball field on Dale Avenue at Chilhowie or Fountain City Park, but then eventually they were switched to Waite Field on Cumberland Avenue on the northwest side of the hill. It was a hard, rocky field, and part of its end zone sloped uphill. So in the early days, there were plenty of injuries, and safety equipment like pads and helmets were pretty minimal at best. They had a little bit of padding sewed into their elbows and their shoulders of their shirts, and they wore leather helmets, but those were no protection against kicks from a cleated foot. Now, in those days, injured players who could manage to limp onto the field were allowed to play, so safety precautions, not very much a thing. In 1915, at an away game with Vanderbilt, UT halfback Bennett Jared suffered a spinal injury as the result of a tackle, and it put him in a wheelchair and eventually caused his death in 1917. After hearing this news, UT president, who at that time was Brown Ayres, that's the fellow that Ayers Hall is named for, by the way, said, "I feel as if I would like never to hear of a football game again." Boy, did he not know what was coming. So I thought that was kind of an interesting story, even though Bennett Jared did not die on the Waite Field. It's kind of not weird to think that he was probably injured when he went into the game. Most of the guys in that game were injured. So they sustained, he wasn't the only guy that was in the pileup, but he was the one who was hurt worst. And eventually, in those days, people with spinal injuries did not live that much longer. So it's unsurprising that he died of that. Now, I guess I'm willing to open up we've got a few minutes left, so just about 8 minutes, and if anybody wants to ask me any questions on the chat, if I still have not been able to get it to show me. There's comments here, let me see. Don't have any questions yet, but if anybody has some, I'll be glad to answer them. And it doesn't have to be about ghost stories that are on campus, but if you've heard one I haven't talked about and you want to know what I know about it, or if I know about it, I'll be glad to talk about that. This particular project was kind of interesting for me because, as I said, when I did the book, I couldn't really find very much out, and since then some more information has come online. One of the things that makes it easier to research for old ghost stories is the Paper to Pixels project that the Knox County Library has done. So a lot of old newspapers have been put online, and you can find those yourself if you have a library card from the Knox County Library. You can use some of those resources yourself to look up old incidents. And what you're looking for when you're looking for ghosts, and I'll tell you what I do, I'm always looking for some tragic or violent or basically things like hanged killers, revengeful acts of violence, anything that involves strong emotion, and it can even be unrequited love or suicide pacts, things like that. I did discover when I was working on the Misbehaving Women tour, I did just run across a couple of stories that gave me some leads on some new ghost stories. I was like, oh, so I have heard there's a reason for that ghost to be there. So one of them was a suicide in what is now the Hyatt Hotel, which is in the Farragut building on Gay Street. The other was a suicide off the Henley Bridge. And so both of those ghosts are now on one of my tours now that I know about them. So I do add to my tours. I started doing the original one in fall of 2012, but it has been improved and made more accurate. I do like to, as I said, I never stop researching, so if I run across information that I think needs to be in there, I will add it in. I try not to make it too long. I try to keep my tours to about 90 minutes because that's long enough for most people. But I do have some that run over, because sometimes you have so many stories to tell, and if people are really excited and want to hear, I'll always throw in an extra story if they want to, if they ask me a question or ask me for it. So, well, don't see any questions, but it's been great to talk to everybody today, and I hope that you'll come see me and visit my website, and maybe go to the library. Does have my book, if you but it is also sold in most of the places that sell books in downtown. Union Avenue, the East Tennessee History Museum, and Visit Knoxville and Mass General all have copies. And you can also buy it from our website. That's, again, knoxvillewalkingtours.com. And there's ordering information on the website if you want to order it. And those come to you signed, so I hope that some of you are interested in doing that. Thanks so much. Hopefully at some point I will be adding to the book either a second volume or at least a supplement to my first book, because since then I have learned so much more about ghosts in Knoxville, and I know I could tell a lot more stories, and I want to share those with as many people as possible. So I'm going to say goodbye. I think we're almost out of time, and I hope this is been informative for some of you, and it's also been fun. So have a great Halloween, and hope to see all of you on a tour someday. Come take a walk with me.